Okay, so imagine this. You're the leader of a nation in your hands. You have this extraordinary power to wipe away someone's guilt, to grant them a fresh start, even for the most serious crimes.
Wow.
That's the essence of a presidential pardon,
It's as
a power steeped in history,
yeah.
and honestly, one that sparked a lot of debate lately.
It really has. What fascinates me is how pardons they are so rooted in legality, but they often just go way beyond the courtroom. They
Yeah.
become these lightning rods for, moral questions,
Yeah.
social anxieties, even raw emotions.
It's true. And, you don't have to look very far to see that playing out right now.
No.
President Biden's recent pardon of his son Hunter has ignited a firestorm.
Oh, absolutely.
Tax evasion, gun charges.
Yeah.
It's a tangled web. And there are people on both sides of the aisle who have very strong opinions about whether this was an act of justice or just a blatant abuse of power.
Right. And to really understand this firestorm, I think we need to go deeper than the headlines and look into the story of pardons themselves. How did this power come to be? And maybe even more importantly, how has it been wielded throughout history?
So we're not just talking about Hunter Biden here. We're talking about the evolution of an idea,
Yes.
a power that's as old as America itself.
Exactly. And the story starts fittingly with George Washington, our very first president.
Okay.
Now, remember, this is a nation that's just barely finding its footing.
Right.
The ink on the Constitution is practically still wet.
Yeah.
And then, boom, the Whiskey Rebellion erupts.
Oh.
Farmers in Pennsylvania, furious over attacks on their livelihood, rise up in armed rebellion.
Wow. Talk about a trial by fire for the young nation.
Yeah.
So how did Washington handle this? Did he crush the rebellion with military force?
He could have, but instead he chose a different path, a path that would really shape the very concept of presidential clemency.
Okay.
He offered the rebels pardons, not to all of them, mind you.
Right.
Some faced trials.
Yeah.
But this act of forgiveness sent a powerful message.
What was that?
Reconciliation was possible, even after armed conflict.
So in a way, Washington wasn't just putting down a rebellion. He was establishing a precedent.
Yes.
A precedent that acknowledged the power of mercy, even in the face of defiance.
Precisely. But here's where the story takes a turn.
Okay.
Fast forward a few years, and we find ourselves in the middle of another political maelstrom.
Uh-oh.
Thomas Jefferson, you see, had campaigned against the Alien and Sedition Acts.
Okay.
Laws seen by many as a direct attack on free speech.
So when he became president, he just repealed them, right? End of story.
Well, not quite. He did repeal the most egregious parts.
Okay.
But there were still people languishing in prison convicted under these very controversial laws.
Right.
So Jefferson took a bold step. He issued pardons to those convicted.
It seems like a clear-cut case of righting a wrong.
It does.
But you said the story takes a turn here. What do you mean?
This act, while seemingly noble, was also deeply political. You see, the Alien and Sedition Acts had been championed by the Federalist Party, Jefferson's political rivals. So by pardoning those convicted, Jefferson wasn't just dispensing justice, he was publicly rebuking his opponents, highlighting their perceived tyranny.
So even in the earliest days of the nation, that duality of the pardon, that blend of mercy and political calculation was already present.
It was.
It makes you wonder, can you ever really separate the two?
That's the question that has haunted the pardon power for centuries.
Wow.
And as we'll see, it's a question that echoes through history right up to the present day.
Well, on that note, I am eager to explore more of this history.
Yes.
Let's see how this power of the pardon evolved,
Okay.
how it's been used, and maybe, just maybe, glean some insights into its future.
Let's do it. Let's fast forward now across the Atlantic
Okay.
to another nation grappling with the complexities of forgiveness, the United Kingdom.
All right, so different system, same tough questions.
Yeah.
But you mentioned a specific case.
Right.
What happened in the UK that sheds light on this?
So in 2013, Queen Elizabeth II issued a posthumous pardon to Alan Turing, a brilliant mathematician and computer scientist.
Oh, wow.
Turing, you see, was instrumental in cracking the Enigma code during World War II.
Wow.
A feat that many believe shortened the war and saved countless lives.
A true hero, it sounds like.
So why did he need a pardon? What happened?
Tragically, Turing's genius was met with profound injustice.
Oh.
In 1952, he was convicted of gross indecency simply because he was gay.
Wow.
At the time, homosexuality was illegal in Britain.
Right.
Turing was subjected to chemical castration.
Oh my God.
A horrific ordeal that ultimately led to his suicide.
That's just heartbreaking that someone who contributed so much was treated so cruelly.
It is.
But this pardon, decades after his death, it feels like an attempt to right a historical wrong.
It was. But it also begs the question, Could the U.S. system, with its focus on individual cases, benefit from a more proactive approach to addressing past injustices? Could we learn from the UK's willingness to confront its own flawed history? It makes you wonder how many other Alan Turings are out there, forgotten victims of unjust laws. But okay, let's shift gears for a second. You mentioned earlier that pardons often become entangled with social anxieties. Is there a case that really exemplifies that?
Absolutely. Let's journey now to South Africa, a nation emerging from the shadow of apartheid, a system of racial segregation that really scarred the soul of the country. In the wake of that dark era, South Africa established the Truth and Reconciliation Commission.
I've heard about this. It wasn't just about punishment, it was about truth-telling and healing.
Right, exactly. The TRC granted amnesty to those who confessed to apartheid-era crimes,
Okay.
but there was the confession had to be full and truthful. It was about acknowledging the horrors of the past, not sweeping them under the rug.
So forgiveness in exchange for truth and accountability, it's a radical concept, really,
Yeah,
but one that seemed to resonate with the need for national healing in South Africa.
yeah.
But is that something that the U.S. could ever embrace?
It's a fascinating question. Could we imagine a similar approach to addressing systemic injustices in our own history? Could pardons be used not just for individual cases, but as a tool for societal reckoning and repair?
It's a thought-provoking idea, for sure.
Uh,
But let's not forget that pardons can be wielded for less noble purposes. You mentioned Russia earlier. What happened there?
In 2013, Vladimir Putin pardoned Mikhail Khodorkovsky, a former oil tycoon and vocal critic of the Kremlin.
Okay.
Khodorkovsky had been imprisoned on charges widely seen as politically motivated,
Yeah.
a way for Putin to silence a powerful opponent.
So this pardon wasn't about justice or mercy. It was a political chess move. But why pardon him at all? Wouldn't it have been easier to just keep him locked up?
Perhaps, but by pardoning Khodorkovsky, Putin achieved several things. First, he neutralized a potential threat, someone who could have rallied opposition from exile.
Okay.
Second, he projected an image of leniency and control on the world stage.
It's a chilling reminder that pardons can be used not only to forgive, but also to manipulate, to consolidate power. It's a far cry from Washington's pardons for the whiskey rebels or even Jefferson's politically charged pardons.
Right.
It feels like we've entered a whole new realm of pardon power.
We have, and as we'll see, this darker side of the pardon, this potential for manipulation and political maneuvering, casts a long shadow, even reaching across the ocean to the shores of America.
Okay, then I'm ready to follow that shadow.
Yeah.
Let's see where it leads us. We've seen how pardons can be these acts of reconciliation,
Yes.
attempts to right historical wrongs, and even tools for, national healing.
Yeah.
But as we just discussed, they can also be used for less noble purposes, as
Yeah.
political chess moves
Right.
to silence opponents or, project an image of power.
Absolutely. And that brings us back to the shores of America, where the recent pardon of Hunter Biden has reignited this fierce debate about the nature of presidential clemency.
It seems like this one case really encapsulates all the complexities and contradictions we've been talking about.
It does.
That blend of mercy and politics,
Yeah.
the potential for healing and manipulation.
Exactly. But instead of, getting lost in the partisan shouting,
Right.
let's try to step back and look at this case through the lens of history.
Okay, so how does Hunter Biden's pardon fit into this larger story of pardons in America? What can we learn from the past that might shed light on this present controversy?
Well, let's go back to 1974. Richard Nixon, facing impeachment for Watergate, resigns in disgrace.
Right.
A moment of national trauma, a crisis of faith in the presidency itself.
And then his successor, Gerald Ford, makes a very controversial decision. He pardons Nixon, shielding him from any future prosecution.
He does. Ford argued that it was necessary for the nation to move on, to heal these deep divisions, but many saw it as a betrayal of justice, a
Yeah.
slap on the wrist for a president who had abused his power.
And the consequences were immediate and severe. Ford's approval ratings plummeted, and he lost his re-election bid. A stark example of how pardons can backfire, spectacularly shaping the political landscape for years to come.
It is a cautionary tale, no doubt, but it also raises this crucial question. Can pardons ever truly achieve their intended purpose of healing and reconciliation when they're perceived as politically motivated?
It seems like the public has to believe that justice is being served,
They do.
even when mercy is being extended.
Right.
Otherwise, it just feels like the powerful are playing by a different set of rules.
Precisely, and that brings us to another pivotal moment in the history of American pardons, the case of Eugene V. Debs.
Debs, the socialist leader who
Mhm.
was imprisoned for speaking out against World War I.
The very same. Now, Debs was a controversial figure, no doubt,
Right.
but his imprisonment sparked this nationwide debate about free speech and the limits of dissent.
And eventually President Harding pardoned him in 1921.
Right.
But didn't you say there was more to the story?
The pardon wasn't simply a presidential decree handed down from on high.
Okay.
There was this massive public campaign for Debs's release, arguing that his imprisonment was a violation of fundamental freedoms.
So public pressure played a role in shaping the outcome. That suggests that pardons can also be a reflection of evolving social values, a way for the system to course correct when it's veered too far from the will of the people.
Exactly, and that's why the current debate about Hunter Biden's pardon is so important. It's not just about one man's legal troubles. It's about what kind of nation we want to be, how we balance justice and mercy, and who gets to decide when forgiveness is warranted.
So after exploring this history of pardons, from acts of reconciliation to tools of political strategy, what can we say about the future of this power? Will it continue to be a source of controversy? Or can we find a way to wield it more effectively, more justly?
Well, as we've seen from looking at other countries, there are alternative models out there: clemency, commissions, increased transparency, public input. These are all ways to potentially add checks and balances to the system without taking away the power of the pardon entirely.
It sounds like we're at a crossroads. We can cling to the old ways, accepting that pardons will always be entangled with politics and prone to accusations of favoritism. Or we can choose to reform the system, making it more transparent, accountable, and ultimately more deserving of public trust.
And that's where you, the listener, come in.
Mm.
The story of pardons is far from over. It's a story that's constantly evolving, shaped by social movements, political winds, and ultimately by the values we as a society choose to uphold.
Mm.
So as you reflect on this deep dive, consider this: what role do you believe forgiveness should play in our justice system? What criteria should guide the use of the pardon power? And how can we ensure that this power is used not to perpetuate privilege, but to promote a more just and equitable society? The answers to those questions might just shape the future of the pardon and perhaps even the future of our nation.